This is Auteur Detour, wherein three film lovers travel through the filmographies of cinema's most important directors in hopes of finding a greater understanding on the other side.
Hello and welcome to Auteur Detour. This is Travis and I'm here with Ian.
Hi.
And Chris.
I'm Ian.
Hello.
Don't mess this up, guys. This is our final episode on the filmography of Alfonso Cuaron. For now. We might have to reconvene if he does anything else, maybe like 6 years from now. But we're going to be discussing his most recent film, 2018's Roma. Roma tells the story of a native Mexican housekeeper named Cleo, who works and lives as a maid in the home of an upper-middle-class family in Mexico City in 1970, 1971, something like that. Her life is defined largely by the work she does, which includes taking care of the family's 4 children. Tensions in the household mount when the family's patriarch takes an extended leave under somewhat mysterious circumstances. Around the same time, Cleo becomes pregnant by a young martial artist who then abandons her. The story largely concerns the life of the family as seen by Cleo. I should say the story in quotation marks, the story such as it is. They go to the movies, they go shopping, they take a trip to visit family. Cleo tries to find her estranged lover. Cleo witnesses the brutal repression of student protesters by CIA-sponsored paramilitary groups. Throughout, the unblinking camera moves perpendicular to the actors, taking in the, again, quote-unquote, action of the household like a silent visitor, capturing a plethora of environmental details in stunning black and white digital visuals, moving like the ocean waves to the gentle rhythms of everyday life. If Y Tu Mama Tambien was the freewheeling experimental student film Cuarón never made, Roma is his stately, self-assured, and stunningly gorgeous entry into the annals of world cinema history. If that movie the earlier film felt like the first Cuarón movie, this feels like the ultimate achievement of his personal vision. I liked it. What'd you guys think?
Ian?
Oh, I love it. I mean, it's undeniable, right? it's just incredibly personal and masterful work. Like, I don't know what else to say about it. It's hard to, even sum up in a 1-sentence review right now because it's just so masterful.
1 sentence. I love this movie so much, you guys.
Oh, good. We're all in agreement.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
You know, you say
cool. Good podcast.
Podcast over. No, it's funny because you say that it's undeniable, but I actually just read, it was kind of like before we watched the movie, I'd only seen it once before, and I was trying to kind of refresh my memory of kind of my impressions of it, and I stumbled upon a little review that was like pretty negative, and it sort of criticized.
Who was it?
Let's get him! It sort of criticized, I guess, like the opacity of the world and the way that it doesn't fully engage with the politics that are going on around Cleo, and even like barely gives her as like a character sort of like a recognizable personality. I mean, you get glimpses of it, but it's really not, again, like a traditional Hollywood film of like, oh, here's her moment where she like explains anything about herself.
Why that's a terrible review, because that's what it's doing, and that's what its brilliance is. In my mind, it's like I was thinking about watching her performance in this movie about what you said during our Children of Men episode, which is like a character that doesn't almost say anything,
Yes.
and then like can still sort of carry you through the movie so powerfully, and like what an example of that she gives in this. It's such an understated performance, but like she's just. I mean, I'm with her the whole time.
Yes, absolutely.
So, I don't know.
Absolutely, and the clarity of the camera work and how much it moves from one place to another allows you to see everything. And among all the things that you see, our eyes almost naturally gravitate toward her no matter what she's doing, even if she's not in the center of the movie. And I think that's actually a really powerful statement about her presence in this film. I watched this movie and I was like, I had no idea what it was. All I knew was the newer Alfonso Cuaron film, watched it on Netflix, and I was like, that was good. And then I just left it alone. And then revisited it, and really watched it, and my God, just again, the detail of the camera work is impressive, but there's so much going on. I think someone described it as chaotic, but that's only because we have so much to see. He doesn't force you to look at any one thing in particular, but your eye naturally gravitates toward that which is most compelling, and in this case, it's the performance by Yalitza Aparicio, who plays Cleo. I think he does that in a couple of ways. One, she's often facing the camera in certain scenes in which no one else is. Some people are looking at her, or people are looking on in the background, kind of forces our eye toward her. But again, just her presence alone, like, I seriously cried. And I never cry in a movie when she gives birth. Yeah. Really, I had to let it go. You know, it's such an understated performance where she's not like overdoing anything, and she's not underdoing it. It's like she just feels like everything is an appropriate response, and that's really amazing to get from someone who's never acted in a movie before.
Absolutely,
she was awesome. I was thinking about it in terms of like the opacity of the like kind of world that she's in, like. The movie does follow her around so much, like that I feel like it's limiting the view of what's going on by her viewpoint. You know, like other Alfonso Cuaron characters, her life is being shaped by forces that she's not fully aware of, like not fully cognizant of. And that's not really a criticism of her as a person or a character. Like that's just like where her life has found her. And then also, watching this movie, I really felt, I mean, we've talked about, Alfonso Cuarón has said like the camera is like his camera is like a ghost, like visiting these places, but it feels so powerful and like kind of magical in this movie where you really feel like you've been dropped in this place, and you're not watching the movie like it's obviously not like Hollywood, like close-ups and like shot reverse shot and stuff like that, but you really feel like the action is like bypassing you, and it makes you like lean forward and try to like figure out what's going on.
Can I say
no
before
and
we keep going?
Yeah, what's up?
Just because we keep talking about this camera work and how he implements it into the story in a way, like that was the most powerful thing to me in this movie also, because I hope this isn't like an incredibly trite thing to say that like people have said about shitty movies or something like that, because it felt so powerful to me when I thought it, like in the watching of this movie, is that
wait, I can stop the watching of this movie.
I'm talking over myself, but no, I just mean like while I was watching it, it felt really powerful in that moment, and then later I was like, I hope this isn't like saying like New York is a character in this.
What movie. You got? You know what you got?
Every movement of the camera felt like a brushstroke by a painter. You know what I mean? Like it was going back and forth, and it felt like brushstrokes. I felt like I was watching him literally paint a picture on the screen for us with his camera. In the way that like the camera would start at one side of the room, pan to the other side of the room sort of slowly, and then pan back to the other side of the room slowly. And it was the opposite of the fly on the wall thing, while still being the fly on the wall thing of the Itzumama Tambien. Like it still was doing that, but it felt more like not like a passive observer, but like a director of it. You know what I mean? Like
totally.
Almost like he was like the slowness, I guess is the only way to say it, of the way that the camera would move past them. Was just like, I want you to like look at every frame that I'm showing you right now. I want you to see this. It felt like he was just like, don't skip past the bookshelf. Like this bookshelf is important. Like it felt like that the whole time. I don't know. That was the most like compelling thing to me as this movie began, was just like, holy shit, I'm in the hands of somebody right now. Like, I don't know.
I was really thinking a lot about Children of Men when I was watching this movie in a number of different ways, and there's a lot of similarities and a lot of absolute stark opposites, specifically with respect to the camera. So, when we have movies like Children of Men, which is really immersive, it's got this handheld camera that follows, is reacting. This movie isn't reacting, it's literally setting the pace for everything. So I think of this, instead of like a ghost, where a ghost kind of follows one around, this is almost like the God camera that knows what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, before it happens, and everything is just happening in accordance to the camera movement, right? So this is the most confident, like assured, one of the most like, here, I'm a director. This is what a real movie looks like. This is what happens when someone totally owns their craft, and it's absolutely beautiful. I don't know how many takes some of these things took, but the final product is just incredible. Like, where do you even begin? with some of these shots.
I love that God camera. That's really funny. And I mean, I see what you mean, Ian. Like when the camera moves, every centimeter that it moves, 20 new bits of visual information are kind of given, and it's so deliberate, right? Every time he moves it, that you feel like he's feeding you like this, like, I wrote like you're drinking in all these visuals like constantly, you know what I mean, while you're watching the movie, and I think that's right on. But I do feel like it. Well, I was gonna say, like, when I was talking about the ghost camera and being sort of placed into this world, it was reminding me really powerfully of something. I couldn't put my finger on it, and then I came up with, I think it's, there's no slow motion in this movie, but the camera is like, it feels like slow motion because the camera is moving so slowly. The lugubrious motion of the camera itself is like the slow motion is what I wrote, but it feels like when you're watching a time travel movie and someone's been placed back in time and they're watching like the main action but from like a removed perspective, and I was like, where have I seen that before? Oh yeah, The Prisoner of Azkaban. It feels like the camera is a little bit like when the kids travel back in time watching the movie from like a third person perspective.
You're right.
And I was like, I thought that was really interesting. And what I was going to say before about kind of the politics of the movie, it sort of makes sense to me that like no one is really able to fully engage with the politics because like having that discussion or even showing that happening almost gives one like the hope that something could like change, but I think because like this is like the past, this is like history, it's already happened, you're just kind of watching these things kind of again like dominoes falling in slow motion, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. So in that way I think it's like sort of makes sense that the politics are not something that's like, what's the problem here? Let's fix it, guys. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's not that story. It's just kind of like observing it from a distance as it all kind of crumbles. Or sometimes at a distance.
Literally from a distance, because there's zero close-ups in this movie, really, right? I mean, almost everything is far away.
Basically. Well, yeah, except for one time when, like, the action of, like, history kind of, like, gets uncomfortably close. But
part of that, to me, felt also like a conscious choice to not do, like, the Hollywood-centric thing of explaining foreign history to U.S. audiences, Like, I feel like a big part of him sort of, I mean, obviously, you're 100% right. Like, a lot of it has to do with the fact that, like, he has to censor Cleo in that struggle and what she is going through and how much she knows and all that stuff. But a big part of it also is just, like, there's no exposition on purpose. And I think a part of that, if you're from Mexico, then you may or may not, but probably do know something about, the Corpus Christi massacre. And like, if you're not, then like, look it up. He's like, this isn't for you guys. Like, that's what he was kind of saying to me a little bit.
And that's so Cuaron too, because we've heard in multiple interviews in the past, he hates when movies have to over-explain stuff. He hates needless exposition and things like that. And this was a really great opportunity for him to absolutely flex those muscles, right? Like, I don't need any I don't even need any sound in this movie, or music, right? Sort of like Children of Men in that way. And that's how your memories would be anyway. You were literally, like, stepping into a memory of his from a sort of a distance. Like, he doesn't need a dialogue or an overarching narrative for his own memories. And neither do we, because this movie speaks for itself.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it also leads to the other most important thing about this movie to me is just that it feels so much more personal than anything he's done before. Like, I mean, that's obvious almost because it is like a autobiographical story in a lot of ways, but like, it feels like even him doing those kind of shots around Cleo and kind of thing, like, it's like he's taking such care with it because it is his own sort of memory that he's trying to articulate or something like that,
Yeah,
Speaking of oh, go ahead.
No, real quick. I made that comment in the Y Tu Mamá También episode, I think, where he really has this affinity for the women in his life, and the maids specifically. Like when Tenoch has his maid comes over, there's a scene later too when they're driving on the road, and there's like the camera lingers on some women essentially that look like they're doing work in the fields, and they're just kind of talking amongst each other. And I also didn't realize until after doing a little research that the maid in Y Tu Mamá También, who is Tenoch's maid, is his actual maid, who Cleo was based on. The lady actually makes her appearance, and so it all kind of comes full circle, I think.
I was just going to say, in terms of like his personal vision, I started the movie last night, and I was like, holy shit, this is his most green movie ever. And then I had to adjust the color on my TV, and I was like, oh, never mind. He went with the standard black and white. That's cool, too. Just kidding. But, yeah, I was going to say, there's this film critic, Andre Bazin. Have you guys heard of him? He was like, did a bunch of film theory back in the old days. And he talked about, as opposed to like Eisenstein, who thought like the art of cinema was really about like editing, his whole thing was like, you know, what the film camera can do is capture time, basically. His word for it was embalming time was his phrase. So it was like this, and I really just like felt so strongly when I was watching this that that's what he was kind of doing, like just capturing these big chunks of time. And Chris, this kind of goes back to what you were saying, but like allowing the viewer to like creating a democratic image where it's not like you're forcing people to look in a specific direction, but really you're filling the frame, the mise en scène, with like these deep focus images where it's the viewer's choice over a long take to say, I want to look at what's happening in the foreground, I want to look at what's happening in the background. And I think Alfonso Cuaron's films like exemplify that like more than maybe any others I've seen. And they were big. He was a big champion, Bazin, of Orson Welles. And I guess when Orson Welles filmed Magnificent Ambersons, he set out to do like a ton of scenes that were like basically just lateral movements of the camera to the characters. And then when the studio got like bad viewer feedback, like in their like test audiences, they went in and recut it and added close-ups, but that wasn't part of like his original kind of vision for the movie. And I don't know, I kept thinking about that as I was watching this.
It's tragic to me that I didn't see this in the theater because it had this Netflix release, you know? I mean, it did play. Neither of you guys saw it in the theater?
Yep, I did.
Travis, you
of
did?
Course,
Oh,
of course. Alfonso Cuaron?
lucky
I'm going to not go to the
Well,
theater?
I don't remember it playing around here. I mean, I can't imagine it did.
So can I tell you a funny story? So I went into the theater and there was no sound at the beginning of the movie. And I was like, okay. And then like the water started washing up and there's still no sound. And I was like, you know, I was at the Alamo Draft House. So there were people like, you know, ushers or servers like in the aisles. And I was like, no sound has happened. Is that a problem? And they were like, I've seen it before. This is what happened. A couple more minutes go, and they're like, oh shit, we messed up. It's just coincidentally this movie has no audio for the first like minute, or like this most subtle audio that builds up, but they didn't notice that it wasn't happening, and so we had to rewatch the first like 6 minutes. I don't know if that like added to all like our interest in the story later or the tension, but it was like sort of like in Y Tu Mama Tambien, where we thought something was wrong with the audio. Like, this was the real version of that. It actually happened.
I had my own experience almost exactly like that, but not, which was that when I put it on Netflix when it first came out, like the opening night of streaming, I watched 10 minutes of it being like, this is a really fucking bold choice for him to make a Spanish language movie without subtitles. The subtitles didn't come on my Netflix for some reason. And I'm like following it and being like, they have to start telling me like what they're saying because I don't know. And then like fucking, it never came on. They ended up having to turn on like closed captioning or whatever. And like then you hear like birds chirping comes up on the screen, you know, like that kind of thing.
God damn it, yeah.
And I was like, this fucking sucks. But that was the first time I watched it, obviously. But I watched 10 minutes of the movie being like, I'm pretty sure I know what's going on right now, but hey, it's not my fault. No, it was this Netflix release. It was a play by Netflix. Cuaron like hates that it didn't get a big screen, you know, rollout, I think. Obviously. It was filmed with like not just incredible visual nuances, but the sound of this movie was like that. You know, it's the best it's ever been.
So
right?
I watched a Blu-ray, and there was like a bonus feature about the post-production of the movie, and they talk about what went into doing all the sound effects and stuff like that, and it was staggering. I mean, it was exhausting just to watch. And they said when they delivered the sound files to the theaters, they thought there was a mistake because the files were 10 times bigger than what they usually get. Oh my God. And it's crazy. Just Alfonso Cuaron's just energy to like what he puts in these movies. Like, I mean, what he achieves is really like due to just like kind of what he's capable of as a human being. Like, he is like an incredible person, just from like a stamina perspective.
Yeah. Well, it explains why he makes a movie like every 5 years or so.
Right.
Yeah, maybe.
That and that and the detail, like you mentioned too. I saw something shortly after this, Road to Roma, and it shows a lot of the behind the scenes, and one of which was all of the extras that he cast weren't just, all right, here's some people on the street, let's get them in my movie. He's literally got a photo, like looks like a mugshot, basically, of each person holding up a card, including who they are, where they're from, what they do, and their age. And there's just countless people. You can see this whole spread, and he chooses them based on, like, are they white Mexican? Are they like a Mixteco? Are they, how old are they? What in this? And he goes through this exhaustive list of hand selecting every extra that's in his movie, I mean, I don't know how long that process alone took, let alone the sound and the staging and the blocking and the lighting and everything that went into all of that, especially when you're talking about making a black and white movie. I mean, that's it looks a certain way as far as the lighting and everything. I don't know. The man is a beast. He's a
It's
beast.
impressive. And like the thing about the extras and stuff like that, I heard that he said something that, like, as the camera pans, through these scenes, every person in the background gets a line, basically, like a tiny, maybe like almost inaudible bit of dialogue, but that every line they say has meaning within the story. And that's just like, again, just an incredible amount of information, an incredible amount of work and craftsmanship. And speaking of craftsmanship, like, I really liked the script in this movie. Like, we've talked about, like, some of Cuarón's writing being, like, one of the, like, kind of maybe weaker elements in some of these movies. But, like, I had literally no problem with anything that happened in this movie. I mean, it was just so on point.
Yeah, the
so
script was
focused.
perfect to me, too. I mean, because it was just so tight, too. Like, the fact that he's telling a non-story, basically. But he's, like, everything that's there is there for a reason. You know what
Every
I mean?
time Cleo moves, like, it's like, to me, it was like watching, the camera's movement and her movement are so kind of controlled. And I felt like, when she's sitting with the family for a moment, and then the mom of the family is kind of like, oh yeah, could you go get, like, my husband some tea? And she's like, okay, you know what I mean? And you just feel like everything in her life is so controlled by the forces around her, because she's a maid, because she's a servant, because she has to answer to, like, the beck and call of, like, this family. It shows how constrained you are, like, by your, financial obligations, by, like, she lives with the family, she gets, like, a tiny bit of time off.
But she's not allowed to turn on her light. Like, after a time,
it's like the difficulty of her, like, life is, and the sort of how constrained her life is so shown, like, by, like, literally every, like, I guess every movement is, like, motivated and controlled, and I felt like that really underscored, like, Cuarón's kind of, like, vision of, like, the way that you're controlled by, like, the forces around you. But I think having the story, like, based on a maid and, like, in these very kind of precarious kind of conditions, and the way she, like, has to go on that big trip to, like, the rich family's house, and then, like, she gets kind of ushered to, like, the lower area where people are, like, partying, like the native Mexicans are, like, kind of partying, and, like, I thought that was really cool, and I thought it almost helped you see, like, the ways your own life is kind of prescribed for you, like, without you knowing it. Just like the omniscient narrator of Y Tu Mama Tambien was kind of, like, describing these kind of aspects of people's lives, these forces in people's lives that maybe they weren't fully aware of or kind of, like, turned away from. The camera in this movie sort of, like, documents the way that your life is forced by, again, like, the God camera, right? Like, kind of, like, dragging her along or pulling her along these kind of paths that she didn't fully choose for herself. And it made me think, like, of my own life, and also, like, imagining how people's lives get forced into things that they would maybe never imagine for themselves. Like, I was thinking of the Theo from Children of Men, and also immigrants in Mexico who travel from there to here, like, because of, like, their circumstances. I just realized Theo and Cleo
didn't choose it.
Exactly, yeah.
But I was gonna say, also the mom, the matriarch of this family has the same thing. Like, she doesn't choose her path either. You know what I mean? Like, and one of the things that the script of this movie does so well, it gives you empathy for her, who has this, like, or it gave me empathy for her. Travis, I could see
the first time I watched this, I had zero empathy for her. I hated her so much. Last night, a little bit more.
I mean, the fact that, like, it's a feminist movie, Chris, you mentioned that earlier, and it's obvious. If there's, Cuarón's obviously such a political guy, and if there's a political or I should say, a socially political message in this movie. It's feminist message, you know. Like, I mean, there's other ones too. There's the ones like you're talking about like the way that the underclass is struggling, for sure. That's there too. But I think that like the way that he shows sort of feminist energy, not feminist as in feminism, but feminine and energy, I should say, as powerful and like as the two different sides of it. Whether you're Cleo, what does it? Do you guys, either of you, remember the name of the mom? So I don't just keep
Sophia.
calling her the mom.
Yeah.
Sophia. So whether you're Cleo, who keeps having to soldier on like through these sort of hardships and without any agency over your own life, basically, or whether you're Sophia, who has this sort of harsh strictness about her, but like when shit hits the fan, she gets it together and also soldiers on, and it's just like, nope, I'm getting a job now. This is what I have to do. Like, she still has like, I'm using terms like soldier, which are like masculine toned words. You know what I mean? And like, he doesn't show them as masculine. That's what I'm trying to say, is that like he's showing that like not all feminist movies have to be like the way that Gravity is just like, oh, it's a female astronaut, and there's the Hollywood thing of being like, you know, what if we put this woman in this man's role kind of thing, you know what I mean? Like this isn't that. This is showing like this is what's powerful about women. Like, I feel like both of those characters show what is powerful about women that men don't necessarily, not men, I shouldn't use gender-coded words like men and women, but that masculine people don't necessarily have the ability to have, you know? Like, I don't know, am I making any sense, or am I just kind of rambling?
Well, I feel like I see it a really different way, because I feel like the women are linked, and they're, I guess, because we're looking at a history where women's roles are so prescribed, that there is like they both share an oppression on them, like in their shitty lives. The men are also kind of like afforded some freedom that the women don't have. Well,
yeah,
even the husband like chooses to leave. That's, you know what I mean. He does like and then Furman kind of chooses to just kind of bail too. Yeah. Like, it feels like they have a freedom that like the women really don't. And
they do, yeah. And then also there's no not just because it's the 70s, but also because this could happen now. Like, we like to think that like when the doctor husband leaves, that the wife can like fight for half the money, or but like that's not even an option. It's just like, oh, he left, so now we have to get by on our own, you know? Like,
I don't mean to say like this is like long, you know, ancient history and that it doesn't apply today, but I guess what I'm trying to say is like it's a look at a specific time in a specific place, how the roles of like women and how the roles of like your role within like a class structure also works, because it does show like, again, like the path that like Furman takes, and like the kind of like weird lifestyle that he's kind of like ushered into, right, by society. And then like, you know, to me it was as much about class as it is about like gender roles in society. And I think the fact that, you know, she's a woman is important, but also the fact that she is a servant from like a lower class working in an upper class. You know, she lives right on the tension between those two kind of like groups.
I think that you're right. I mean, it's definitely about class as a movie. Like, that's what the movie is about. I'm just talking about like, Cuarón has this way of adding a layer of politics onto things that are not necessarily what the movie is about. Like, he has a way of making these choices where he's like, okay, this is a movie about, you know, like a woman who has no privilege and has no you know, like I said, agency over her own life, and then like how she reacts to the world around her and how she takes care of the people around her and all that kind of stuff. And then like, that's not enough. Like, he also has this thing where he's like, well, in the same way that Children of Men, he made a choice to be like, I'm gonna show London the way that it really is, with like black people everywhere. You know what I mean? It's like, that's not like what the movie's about, but he made a choice to be like, no, I'm not going to show an all white London. You know what I mean? Like, that's like it's just another level that he's working on. In this way, I feel like Roma, he's also being like, well, that's what the movie is about, but like, I also want to show you like these women like are fucking pulling it through. Like they are the ones who are fucking working. The men are like checked out or like causing this shit. You know what I mean? Like, okay, go ahead, Chris.
No, 100%. And to your point about the feminine, he does a really great job of understating the power of the feminine in a lot of ways, especially Cleo, who many might regard as, oh, she's the underling, she's the maid, you know. But obviously, aside from the part where she saves the children, literally from the water, but basically the only really funny part in an otherwise not particularly funny movie is the training sequence where I guess his name's Professor Zovek. He's kind of this odd-looking...
oh, I'm sorry. You didn't laugh at the dick dangle? That was hilarious.
Well, no, right.
Okay,
I mean, it's not like an overtly funny movie, right? But there's, of course, that scene
I was
where
in awe.
The guys are training, and he's actually played by a Mexican luchador, a Latin lover who was also in the WWF. Really funny guy, and he does this kind of sun salutation, if you will, when he stands on one leg, like, "No, this is very difficult. Try it." And the dudes cannot do it, right? And then the camera cuts over to her, and there she is, just the sun shining right behind her. Yeah. She does it flawlessly, just standing easily, totally at peace, fully capable, and that's kind of her, like an understated. No one's really looking at her, but she's doing it, and she's fully capable in and of in the thing that she's doing in that moment. And I don't know, that kind of speaks to what she's capable of, above and beyond these hyper masculinized, radicalized men that are like looking to train and kick ass. She's got this sort of zen ability that's above and beyond what they're capable of, and that serves her well throughout the rest of the movie. You know, he does great ways of highlighting her subtle power, if you will.
Absolutely.
Back to the dick dangle, because that's also like worthy of saying in the same way of that. Like, I feel like the fact that he films the sex scene in that way, you know, where like the sex scene in this movie is such an anti-sex scene. Like, it's literally this fucking ripped dude jumping around doing martial arts with his dick flopping around, and she's just kind of like sitting there watching, you know, the way that we were sitting there watching,
trying not to laugh. Yeah.
And, yeah, exactly. And I think that like him framing it that way felt like a feminist act in a weird way too, because like it is like it would feel weird to sort of suddenly position her as a object. You know what I mean? Like he has to be the object in that moment.
Yeah.
Good point.
They call that the female gaze. That's the closest I think the movie comes to like a direct eyeline match is when she's looking at Fermin, and that doing his thing, and that's the closest it gets to a close up. I think is when Fermin goes in to kiss her, and you get this weird, obscured, shadowed face where he's kind of like off to the side of the frame, but that's kind of the closest the face ever gets to the camera, I think.
Well, that and immediately after she gives birth, and there's a kind of a closer shot where the background's actually blurred of her just kind of gazing in the kitchen, and that's a really important moment too.
Yes, that's right. Oh, that's a beautiful shot. Yeah, you're totally right. I was going to say, you know, bringing up her kind of like incredible solidity and stuff like that, her kind of Zen mastery, that's another criticism of this film I remember hearing when it came out is just that she was painted like as like kind of in this kind of like inhuman, like saintly way. Like she's just this ever kind of suffering, silent native woman, and it was kind of like fetishizing or infantilizing. I didn't feel that way, and I felt like, you know, she does literally what she needs to do to survive. And Chris, you brought up really early on the Cuaron kind of theme of like people forced kind of to just survive like through like extraordinary circumstances, and literally with her just kind of like chill going through her daily life, like that's what she's doing. Do you know what I mean? That like just trying to find little moments of peace and little moments of like relaxation, like that's just what she has to do to like get through the day, and that is a form of like survival and heroicism. And I don't think it's saintly at all. I think it's just, but it is very easy to kind of empathize with, you know, and to kind of like admire. But I
think when I first watched it, I did in that moment when she does the Zen, like you said, just the kind of joke moment in that. I don't know that it's necessarily a joke, but it is kind of played like that. It did hit me that way of like, I don't know, a little bit of what you're talking about, of like the fetishizing of sort of this woman, you know? But then I did, even in my first watch, sort of go back and read it more as like, this is how Zen and like powerful she is, but also asking us the question, like, or forcing us to ask ourselves the question, imagine what she could be if she wasn't in this situation.
Yes,
you know,
exactly.
imagine what this woman could be like if she wasn't like forced to
imagine
this,
her
like,
liberated. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Great point. And like, you know, another thing is like, okay, they don't fully maybe engage with the politics of, you know, why the students are protesting, et cetera, but like the fact that we see this extremely prescribed, like striated class system and these roles that these people are forced into, juxtaposed against like this political turmoil that's happening at the same time. I mean, we see the structures and we see the threats to the structures, and I think you can, you know, I like you said, it's like really easy to read into that. Like something should change. We want something to change, and in this movie, it's not going to change. You know, we haven't talked about like the opening shot much, like of the looking down at the ground where the water washes over the ground, and you see this reflection of like the sky, and I really, like, on this watching, like, thought that was like the most powerful image.
I wrote
100%.
My first note here is opens with water. At once it's a tile floor being cleaned by a servant in an ocean and earth worthy of gravity's awe. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's like it's both things all at once, where it's like showing this sort of life of a servant, you know?
Yes.
And then it's also showing like the magnitude of like the water is waves, you know? The water is like, and the sound of that, you know, it's, what's his name? Skip Levisay? Is that the sound guy's name?
I don't know.
He's also the Coen sound guy. Like he
Nice.
did all the or most of the Coen brothers movies, and just to tie it full circle for the last 2 seasons, and I think he got the Oscar for this movie. Anyway, the sound of the water splashing in that first shot is the most powerful sound in the movie to me. Like that just opening like rush of water is like so all involving. You know, it's like.
And let's not forget too that they both begin and end with the image of an airplane kind of in the distance, one being reflected in the water in the beginning, and of course at the very end the camera pans up and one of the last things we see is the airplane in the distance. And I think that's really interesting because it's sort of reminding us that there is a bigger world out there, but it's only from a distance. We're only given this little view. This isn't this entirely self-contained world, and we often hear the airplanes kind of throughout because it's apparently right over an airport or something, because Mexico City's, you know, big city and whatnot, but you can actually hear the airplanes in multiple instances throughout the movie too, to your point about the sound and the consistency.
I think you know, I think the ocean is like an incredibly powerful like symbol for Alfonso Cuaron, and I think flight and planes are very powerful too for him. And when you see the plane at the beginning, like the sky at the beginning, it's like a phantom. You know what I mean? It's like an illusion. It's like this hint of like you know, I don't know. In this like reflection, you're seeing like hope or possibility. You know what I mean? But it's just like illusory. It's just like ephemeral. You go through this movie, you watch all this horrible stuff happen. You watch like kind of a threat to the status quo, right, happening, and maybe some change happening, but it's already happened. It's in the past. There's no kind of like going in and like changing it in any way. But at the end of the movie, you through the kind of like the rooftops of like where she's living and through like the buildings that are there, you see the actual sky, and I think it's pointing to like, you know, the only hope for change is like in the future. It comes after this story, kind of what's going to happen, and you see like an airplane flying, and I think that's kind of what it's saying. Like you go from like being stuck on the ground to like
the Children of Men in a weird way.
It's very similar, yeah.
And I thought of that, you know, obviously while I was watching it too.
I was thinking, you know,
in the watching of this movie.
I really watching this movie this time. I was really struck by like how Y Tu Mama Tambien, Children of Men, and this function as like a trilogy, and I think of it now like the history trilogy, like, you know, because like politics is history, right? Human history is politics, and like this is like the movie of like the past. Y Tu Mama Tambien is like the present, you know, where there's these things happening around you, even if you're not conscious of them. And then Children of Men shows kind of like the inevitable future that this is all kind of leading towards. And I think that cameras do similar stuff in these movies, even though they're like technically like the style of them is very different. But yeah, I really feel like these are like his 3 kind of like linked films.
I want to get not too much further, unless you have something on that, Chris, but I want to get not too much further without talking about some of the moments in this movie that were really incredible to me. Like, we haven't really talked a lot about the plot moments. The introduction of the dad is one of the most iconic introductions in film history to me. Like, that car pulling into the fucking garage it's Fellini, like, filmmaking to me. It's just so, I mean, it's clearly Fellini. Like, it's taking so much from that, but it is, like, the one word that I could come up with for, like, what that character is before you see his face is imposing, right? Like, he's just like this figure in their life that like they don't know, like, even though he never shows himself to be angry or violent really or anything like that, but like you get the feeling like none of them really, he's unknowable to them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like as he pulls in and pulls out, and it's so slow and deliberate, those shots where it's just like close up on the fucking headlight for 8 seconds and as it's pulling close, backs up. It's like, I just fucking thought that was such a powerful shot. And it was that moment where you're like you said, Chris, where you're just like, oh, I'm in the hands of a master now. Like, there's no way around it. Like, he's just fucking got me in the grips.
He was like kind of like a magical figure for the family, but he's also like kind of ridiculous too at the same time. Like even in that introduction, it's like, oh, this is his little world, like,
Yeah.
And in this viewing, he really actually reminded me of Luisa's husband. He's like this professorial guy who's like all serious and full of himself. Because it's as much like he's a myth of his own making too, right? And in his like family's eyes, but like when you see him out in the world, he's just kind of a ridiculous guy. And
he's even the pilot in Solo con tu pareja. He's like, I think he takes a lot probably from his own dad, who, that's what I was thinking watching this, is just like, I feel like I'm watching Alfonso Cuaron like try to sum up his childhood memories of his dad, and he's doing it flawlessly.
Yeah.
And then like looking back, you can look at so many of the male characters in his movies and be like, oh, that's where he learned it from. It was from his dad,
Yeah, maybe,
And maybe I'm adding this on to him because who knows? He's a fucking filmmaker. Like, but it does feel so personal in that moment of like, how do you paint a picture of your dad? And like, he chose to do it by having like the car squeaking into the fucking tight driveway. Like, I don't know. It was really, really cool. Also, the dogs I wanted to get to, because the dogs are so, like, that's a Cuarón thing, obviously, and they are more present in this movie, not just visually, but like you never aren't hearing the sound of dogs barking, Like, he just loves, I love the way he films dogs.
They're even present when the dogs themselves aren't present. Like, that driveway is
like,
always...
not just visually, but...
Yeah, because that driveway's always got dog shit on it. There's not one moment in any scene where we see that there's not at least a piece of dog poop in that driveway. I made sure to, tally that up this time. The ever poopy driveway.
I mean, I wrote a bunch of notes about different moments in the movies, like the long pan over the kids' room where you have all these incredible details of like all their toys and stuff like that. And it's, at some point it kind of hit me when I was watching that shot, like, this kid probably has more possessions than Cleo does,
oh yeah.
So
Definitely.
it's like, again, every shot like has like, like you were saying, Ian, I kind of like was resisting what you were saying because like saying like he's adding on like, oh, feminism to this, when I really feel like in his movies, like, they're all interconnected, and so like, you know what I mean? It's more than just any like one thing plus another thing. It's really like this whole world where he's, I don't know, like there's so many forces happening. Also, the kid, when he talks about his like past life, he says he was a pilot in his past life, and then later he says he was like a sailor. But but I thought that was interesting. Kids really say weird stuff like that, like about how they were like used to their previous lives.
I thought the kids, especially the sort of Alfonso Cuarón surrogate kid, like, or at least that's how I took it, were incredible in this movie. I mean, we've talked a lot about his child actors and how so often they can feel stilted and sort of other, just of a movie, I guess I would say. This feels so naturalistic, and like every part of it, that sort of a initial scene of them when not the first one, but when he lies down on his back and says I'm dead, and she lies down next to him. It's just like, I like being dead. It's quiet or whatever,
Yeah.
Like, that's like, it's, you feel the closeness and you feel the realistic sort of bond that they would have, you know, and
Yes.
like I don't know, it's really good.
While at the same time,
I
was just gonna say real quickly, at the same time, kind of highlighting how little she really gets to rest. You know, like wow, this is an amazing opportunity to actually not do work for once.
Yeah.
You know, and be present with you guys.
1,000%. You know, I also feel like I'm gonna kind of get to this in my kind of final thoughts for Cuarón, but like one of the, you know, Chris, you made a great point in the Children of Men episode about there's not really a villain in the movie, right? It's literally just these oppressive structures that we've built up as a society that like you have to fight against, and the struggle is just breaking out of that status quo, and you know, there's this thing called the death drive, which is like one of Freud's like theories of like humanity, and it's like, because at first he was like, yeah, everything's driven by sex, and then he's like, but wait, why does this keep happening? Why does this thing keep happening? And he had this idea that like there's part of you that like wants to die and wants to like put yourself in danger and wants to kill yourself, and like weirdly, like the systems that we've set up that are like we can see that they're leading to us all dying. And there's part of our brain, like subconsciously, that's telling us, like, but that's easier than like changing it. And so we just kind of go along with our daily lives. And I think that is like this, like maybe the central struggle of like the Alfonso Cuarón protagonist, at least in some of like, at least in his later movies. And I think Cleo again doesn't have to like battle, like, you know, on like the story doesn't make her actually have to fight for things that in that same way as like a lot of the characters, but I think that's her just surviving is like, and like witnessing these things is her journey. I don't know, but yeah, there is that like death drive that she's like battling.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I agree.
Have you guys seen any Béla Tarr movies? He's a Hungarian guy. That moment where the guy is singing at the fire reminded me of Béla Tarr. He's like, he did Werkmeister harmonies. He did. He does these like long 4 hours movies. They're really amazing. Yeah. Anyway, it's just like he's one of these like again giants of like world cinema, and whereas Alfonso Cuarón doesn't kind of I feel like always get that same respect. You know.
Yeah.
I've loved watching these movies with you guys. It's been so fun.
Me too.
100%.
I mean, there's more I want to talk about this movie, but I also, you know, I'm almost ready to get into our sort of final Cuarón thoughts. Like, what do you guys have to say about this movie more?
I love that they go to see basically the gravity of 1970.
Oh yeah,
Marooned.
you mentioned that
Right? I almost even thought it was George Clooney for a split second. I'm like, he kind of closes up on the guy. I'm like, is this Clooney? No, never mind.
Right.
But I would say one last thing is, as I've mentioned many a time, due to my hearing, of course, I respond to visuals, and this movie is quite literally the embodiment of the saying "every frame a painting." I didn't watch it all the way through just in one take exactly. I had to come back to it a couple different times, and every single time I did, I'm drawn in immediately. There's no point. I'm like, all right. Just the way he frames it, the camera, the clarity, the choice to shoot on digital, of course, where you can see every tiny detail without an ounce of grain or anything to it. It's just, for someone like me who's big on visuals, it's just unparalleled. I'm just so glad that he made this movie and was able to finally create this movie, especially one that's so personal to him. Because, you know, we've talked about directors that have to put in their work in order to finally make the movie they really ultimately wanted to make, and this is clearly that. He made, you know, 2 huge hits, you know, before that, or at least one massive hit in Gravity, you know, and Roma, of course, became a hit. And just real quickly to that point, unlike you guys, I don't do a lot of research around the movie when it comes out. I just watch it completely blind as possible and then leave it be and like let it, you know, marinate in my own head. So I had no idea when I finished this movie. I was like, did anyone see this? I'd never heard anyone talk about it. I don't watch the Academy Awards. I'm like, I hope this movie like got some kind of recognition because God damn it, this is amazing. It did. It totally did. And I'm so glad, because this is one of those movies that feels like it could get totally overlooked in the mainstream sort of Hollywood Academy Award oriented sort of atmosphere given to like some biopic about, you know, some person that's super
played
famous.
By some British asshole. Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
Totally. Yes, exactly. Played by Colin Firth. Right. So I'm just so glad, again, now knowing what I know, that this movie was so well received and got all the accolades that it deserved. It's just a hell of a feat.
So the shots look like historical photos, like, you know what I mean?
They do.
And I guess he talked a lot about I guess he started in terms of like his visual art as a still photographer, early on, and he talked about that in some of the like interviews that he did, I guess, around the movie. At least in little bonus features I watched last night, he kept talking about his history as a photographer, and yeah, I mean, when it ends on that dead student, right, and the woman kind of wailing over him, and again, the camera just like never cuts; it just holds for so long, and you feel like you're like again like dropped into these historical moments where a photo was taken, and then watching it kind of play out like almost uncomfortably long, and like I thought the exact same thing, Chris. I just thought it was so beautiful, and just like every shot was just like I don't know.
I mean, it's beautiful, and then there's these scenes like the labor scene when she, gives birth to this stillborn baby, and it's like, that's not beautiful. That's fucking. I mean, it is beautiful, but it's like so intense.
When the earthquake, totally. When the earthquake happens, in the like baby ward, I don't know what you call it, but like
maternity ward.
That's like, oh, Mr. Fancy, it's called a maternity ward. You're just
the
like,
car hole.
You're just the baby hole. Yeah, you realize like you're like, oh shit, like this is the guy who made Gravity. He could like freak me out at any moment. You know what I mean? Like you kind of get shaken a little bit because you know how far he could take it. Like how far is he going to take it? Like this, there's some real shit that happens in this movie, and that shot of the rubble on the baby incubator is like so disturbing and kind of like foreshadows a lot of what's going to happen. And so, and then a hard cut to like these crosses on the side of the road. Like, it's
that sequence is harsh. I mean, it's also more of what she's been dealing with the whole time of just like feeling like she has no agency about what's happening around.
Right.
You know what
Totally.
I mean?
Totally.
It's just like the way that they are
she's
talking
like looks
to her
around.
And the way
like,
that she's like doesn't know what's going on. They aren't telling her what's going on, and like. She's basically like just a passenger through that birth, you know what I mean? Like, and it's brutal to watch, because that it's how fucking it happens, like.
Right. And we say how, it wasn't beautiful, but the birth scene actually is absolutely beautiful in the intimacy of that. You don't see too often in movies the actual birth experience from the woman's perspective. It's usually the aftermath. You see the baby born, and that's that, or you don't focus on the woman's experience, because this is an absolutely life-changing event. Anyone who's been present for a birth, anyone who's been present for a birth understands the gravity of that situation, regardless of whatever that outcome was. In her case, it was a tragic one, but the fact that he chose to focus so much on her and her experience of it, your eyes never leave Cleo for a moment, and the power of that moment is so special. Again, it could have been treated in any number of ways, and most other filmmakers would probably not do it that way, but it's so important and so beautiful to be there and absolutely sitting through this experience with her, and it's critical, and it's a beautiful decision by Cuaron. I love that. Again, I cried, and I never cry in a movie.
You're crying right now, Chris. Like, we can see it.
You're crying.
Like, and even though the healthcare system seems like relatively decent, and like the people that she interacts with at the hospital are really decent, you do feel like a little like alienation from like the bureaucracy of it, and you feel like this should be better. This should be easier for her. And she only gets into the hospital, right, or like this good place because of the kindness of the mother of the family, like just her kind of gesture. And I have more to say about that, but did you want to say something, Ian?
No, I mean, nothing.
Sorry, I thought you were going to say something. I was just going to say, like, in Y Tu Mama Tambien, similar to this movie, there's like a trip to the beach at the end that is under unique circumstances. In Y Tu Mama Tambien, it's Louisa's imminent death. And in this, it's because she had this, like, stillbirth that the mom of the family, like, grants her permission to join them on this family vacation. And then the movie ends with her kind of like, or like the penultimate scene or whatever, is her rescuing these kids, and these kind of like in this moment, like all the social structures are kind of fall apart or fall away, and there's this moment where they're just all hugging as a family, and so, I was reminded of like Y Tu Mama Tambien, like the three of them coming together in this like kind of beautiful moment, and just like Y Tu Mama Tambien, like you can see the structures kind of reforming once they go back to the city, and it's so heartbreaking, and like the kid is just like, oh yeah, could you get my thing, and it's just like, like, you know, and it's just, and then I think the last line of the movie is something like, you know, she's like, oh, tell me all about it. And she's like, I'll tell you later. And like, you feel like all we have is this story to take with us. And like, what are we going to do with it? And then like the shot of the sky. Oh, incredible.
Yeah.
But I really feel like there's a
But you're
strong
right.
link
I mean,
there,
it is that is absolutely linked. I mean, that moment when they do feel like a family all of a sudden. You know? when they after she saves them. And then, like you said, they go back to real life, and the past is still there.
Yes,
like you can't escape it.
Yeah,
it's fucking brutal.
And that's why if you watch it in a row with Children of Men and you watch Children of Men last, like there is that like hopeful, like with a boat at the end. You know what I mean? Like that's that's the closest. That's almost the closest it gets to a happy ending, like in one of these movies.
But also, like Children of Men, I mean, they mention that Cleo can't swim, right?
Right.
And that like there is a moment, and this is, I don't know, what do you guys think about this? Like, she is doing that thing of like sacrificing herself for the life of a child. You know what I mean? Like she does survive it. And, you know, Theo doesn't.
Right.
But Cleo is like, oh, like that child is drowning. I'm going into the fucking water to save it. You know, like despite the fact that I can't swim. Like it's that thing we talked about a lot in Children of Men of just like when you're, you know, sort of ready to pick up that, to answer the call, to use Ghostbusters terms. I'm just kidding. Sorry. When you're ready to live up to your highest potential or whatever you want to call
your
it.
Humanity,
Your humanity. Then like all of a sudden life is less important in a weird way. You know, like I
mean, she loves these kids, and she says like multiple times, like I love these kids, like So yeah,
and they love her.
You're right,
right? They say multiple times, "We love you." Absolutely.
I have another note here. Can I read you this?
Yeah.
There's a movie. Have you guys seen the movie Vivre Sire by Jean-Luc Godard? It's awesome. It's black and white. There's a line early on in the movie where they're talking about like a side character who died, or they're talking about maybe someone you've never seen, and they're like, oh, this guy died. It was some political thing. And it's just sort of dropped early on in the conversation. The movie is about a woman who chooses to become a prostitute to support herself. And in like, you know, a capitalist patriarchal society. And in the end, spoiler alert, she gets killed when like her pimp is trying to trade her for something, and like, you know, make a deal where he basically like he's gonna traffic her, like, you know, basically she's getting trafficked and she gets shot and murdered. And basically the idea, I think, is like, even if you don't concern yourself with politics, even if you have like even like, you know, just this complete peripheral view of like what's happening politically in the world, you're nevertheless subjected to its forces. You know, and that line kind of haunts you at the end, because it's like, yeah, it's a political thing, like money and all, you know, all this stuff. Right. Your role, like your gendered role in society, like as an object in it, you know, as a product. And I felt an echo in this movie. Like, you know, Godard feels like such a strong influence on this movie, as does like Fellini, as does like De Sica. I mean, but there's the line when Furman says to Cleo, she asks if he's like training for the Olympics or something. You know, he's like, what is this for? And he's like, something like that. And I thought it was kind of like, you know, the Olympics are also, you know, like a propaganda thing. You know what I mean? Like, just like the paramilitary group is like a way for the government to like operate like in a kind of clandestine way. Like the Olympics are kind of like the propaganda arm of the government's like kind of thing. So I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. Like, I feel like he was so like good with dialogue in this movie, you know. Like,
yeah, the dialogue is incredible. And was he the sole writer of this movie?
Writer, yeah, the sole credited writer.
And cinematographer and
co-editor and director. Yeah. Like, just complete control. And God, what a product.
Yeah, people said, you know, oh wow, he must have learned so much from Lubezki. Obviously he did, but you know, it doesn't feel like, I mean, it feels just like him. You know, it doesn't feel like he's copying things from Lubezki. It just feels like they obviously have this sort of language that they use together, and he's using it. You know,
exactly. But it feels different though. You know, like there's less kind of swirling, and it's less.
It feels way different.
You know what I mean? There's less.
Exactly.
Like,
that's what I mean. It's like it doesn't feel like he's like, just doing Lubeski behind the camera, like, oh, I could do that.
Right,
It's
right.
like he's speaking his own language, but like,
But it's
part of that is the language that they clearly speak
yes,
together.
I feel like it's like if a camera had like a a will of its own, like he's using their camera. Do you know what I mean? But he's using it in a different way, but it's still that same camera.
Yeah. Should we get into our final thoughts?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay, I'll go first if you want. Or
Yeah, you go first. I'll go last.
Okay, I'll just kind of read what I wrote. I didn't write, like I said last time, I didn't write like an essay. I just sort of wrote a lot of notes. But thinking about his contemporaries, and even like the Coens and Tarantinos and Wes Andersons and even Scorsese, like people that that we love, like they all sort of exist in this world, usually of sort of diorama filmmaking, where they see an image in their mind and then they sort of want to create it, and they're pulling a lot from sort of cultural consciousness. He doesn't feel like that at all to me, which makes him such a singular director of his time. The thing that's the most powerful to me after watching all of his movies is that the only people that I can sort of compare him to are people like Fellini, Godard, Truffaut, these people who sort of saw filmmaking in the 50s and were like, oh, film can be more. Like he's the guy who in the 2000s, or I should say in the 90s, was like, film can be more. Like, you guys don't have a big enough imagination. And he brought his imagination into filmmaking. And that can come up in like a technical way where he completely brings power of, or I mean, the scope of what we can do or what people can do as filmmaking to a new level, where he's like, gravity it invented stuff, and he did that not because he was like Robert Zemeckis wanting to be like, no, the future is people in green suits with
ping pong balls
everywhere. Like, he did it because he was like, this is how I'm gonna make this movie, Gravity. Like, I want it to feel like you're in space, like, and whatever it took to get there. I'm a musician, and I have a lot of musician friends that it doesn't matter what instrument that they're playing. I shouldn't say I have a lot. I have a couple of people in my mind that I can think of where it's like, you could sit them down at a fucking drum set or a guitar or a tuba or a fucking whatever, and they're gonna be like, I'm gonna make music out of this thing. You know what I mean? That's what he feels like as a filmmaker. Like, it feels like he's just breathes it, was born to do it, and like it flows out of him in like a manic and beautiful way. But he has such mastery of it that like it doesn't even matter that he is a master of it, because it is like you're watching film like incarnate when you watch one of his movies. It's like, that's why I was thinking about him as this sort of singular director now, because in a world that we're living in right now where it's all fanfic movie making, where it's like these guys have these big budgets, and they're like, oh, I'm gonna recreate that thing that I saw as a kid, but my way, or it's like, even in a good way, of Tarantino being like, I want to like recreate this image that I have in my head. What Cuaron does is, I'm going to speak for him right now. I have this deeply
He has an accent.
I'm not going to do an accent, Travis. You almost got me. No, he's got this deeply political, drive to him that feels punk rock in a weird way. It drives him to make these stories where, whether they're topical or not, like, they aren't topical in a message-driven way, which is to say that, like, all of the topics that he uses are sort of contextual to tell what his real motivation is, which is to say, like, oh, we could be better. Like, we could be living in a better world. And he uses these tools. I mean, we've talked about this a lot over the podcast, and it's not something I would have guessed going into this. I know Travis had more experience with Alfonso Cuaron, but like, watching all 8 of his movies back to back, he can take a topical issue like immigration or AIDS or the health of the earth in like Gravity, the way that it shows you like how magnificent the earth is, and like it gives you this feeling of wonder sort of about the earth itself. Or like it really just feels like he's just using it as a context. Those issues are important to him, but he's using it as a context to be like, oh, the world might feel impossible and difficult and like, a lot of work and hopeless, but like he uses filmmaking to like create those boundaries and then show you a brief grain of sand of like, oh, the world could be possible and hopeful and wonderful and easy, and like it's powerful to watch that kind of thing, and it's not what any other filmmaker's doing, which makes me just feel like he's such a gift. Like this series was a gift to me because it made me appreciate him as a filmmaker, not just because his movies are so good, but like, Harry Potter goes through that. Like, that's a fucking franchise Harry Potter movie. And he does it in that movie, where he shows these characters. He does it from fucking Harry Potter to Children of Men to Y Tu Mamá También to fucking A Little Princess. Like, all these things where he's just like, these characters are going through it. And then you get this little window into like, but it doesn't have to be this way. Like, that's what's so important to him. I don't know. I love him.
Absolutely.
100%.
I love the comparison of him to like that he's the idea that he stands like not with his contemporaries but like with like the the gods of yesteryear. I think that's like so true. Which is funny because he's such a contemporary filmmaker and he's such like the digital effects that he's been doing since A Little Princess. You know what I mean? Like are such a part of his like thing. But you're right.
They are a part of his thing, but they do feel more like the language that he's choosing to use.
He's using everything at his disposal. He's pushing the boundaries of what's possible now, which is why he's like such an important person. Totally.
I'm not gonna like talk shit about more about like Zemeckis and Cameron and Ang Lee and these guys who sort of tinker a lot, because
don't put James Cameron in.
That's not that's not what I'm here to talk about. But like having put him in that camp before we started this series, it's just such a different beast. Like he does the same thing in that he is propelling filmmaking forward, but really he's propelling the idea of film forward, like the idea of like what movies can be forward. Yeah. That in that way he's like Fellini or Godard to me. Like
totally.
Well said. Yeah, I think I mentioned a long time ago how Gravity was actually my first time being conscious of him as a director. Like, this is an Alfonso Cuaron movie. That made me go, who did this? And then realize, oh, I have seen this guy's movies before, which kind of raises this point of how unique and how different he's been able to pull off all of these different films. So if we look at just the 8 movies, right? Solo con tu pareja, film shot in Mexico City, kind of wacky screwball comedy, to A Little Princess, shot in America, in English, speaking cast, kind of fantastic, to Great Expectations. There's a Dickensian kind of drier, kind of weird, bigger.
We don't talk about that one.
But like the more Hollywood stars, recognizable faces, of course, with, Robert De Niro and Ethan Hawke and, Gwyneth Paltrow, to Y Tu Mamá También, a very, to American audiences, maybe totally unrecognizable cast in a totally different language, to the third Harry Potter movie, in a sequel or as franchise that's already hugely established, fantasy film, to this bleak dystopian Children of Men film, with a few recognizable faces too, without like that, the star power that would come with Gravity, which is this massive, huge blockbuster hit, filmed in outer space, or not filmed in it, but taking place in outer space. I thought it was filmed in outer space. Right? I'm like, how did he get the camera out there? That's amazing. To Roma, right? This absolutely, completely personal, sweeping. Again, we haven't used the word masterpiece, thank God, because I hate that word for some, I think, but it's the best thing I can come to describing Roma. And so I think what I'm saying is he has such a vast array of approaches to his movies in a way that a lot of others don't. I think we mentioned before, we've never seen the same actor in more than one movie. We've never seen the same actor.
Once.
No, who have we seen more than once?
In Children of Men and Harry Potter, the girl who plays the Aunt Marge in Harry Potter is also the woman who's Key's sort of keeper.
What?
Or wrangler.
No shit.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, wow.
I stand corrected. I had no idea. Didn't even notice that. But,
the exception that proves the rule.
But anyway,
the rule, Chris.
But I think again that adds on to this sort of unique feel of each one of his movies stands alone and is independent of one another, which is why I think it was initially difficult for me to go, oh, this is clearly an Alfonso Cuaron movie, you know, because it all come off as so unique and so distinctive. I think I wrote this note, especially after watching Roma. He's not reinventing himself. He's gaining new powers, like some sort of filmmaker, Super Saiyan, or like an Islander of some kind, you know? Like he's amassing all of this power, and he can either choose to use certain abilities or like not, you know? And it all came together in Roma, and he's just absolutely flexing every one of his muscles, being, again, the editor, the cinematographer, the director, the writer, the producer, all of it. And it almost raises the question, what's next? Where do you go after this? And again, so that movie was in 2018. It's been about 4 years or so, which is, I think if we look at the space between all of his movies, about his average between releases. So I don't know if he's got another movie in the mix. Obviously, I'm going to see it. I'm just curious where he goes from here.
Unfortunately, like the rest of the world, he's moved into TV. He's got a series coming to Apple Plus next year or something like that. So that's where his
energy
that's where
going.
he's been working. Yeah.
Okay. But overall, I'm so glad we covered this director, and I'm absolutely so glad I got to see Roma again, because it feels like the perfect cap on this amazing career. It's so rare to me to see a director's last movie. Not that this is going to be the last movie he ever makes, but this absolute crowning achievement on an otherwise amazing career. A guy who's tried a lot of different things, some successfully, others not so successfully, like Great Expectations. And even, again, Harry Potter 3 was the least grossing film in that franchise, ironically. But it's the best one, as we've I think we can all agree. So just amazing way to cap off an astounding career. I'm so stoked we got to cover him. Thanks for raising this, Travis. Great call. And again, I'm just so interested to see where he goes next, no matter what that might look like.
Yeah, and you guys mentioned, I think, that it was that the movie was on Netflix, and it's interesting that both the directors we've covered, like, ended their careers with doing these really, I mean, right. This is not a negative, I'm not saying this in any kind of negative way, but these kind of incredibly indulgent movies that Netflix allowed them to make, where they got to use all this money, actors, digital effects. I mean, I guess you were comparing it to contemporary movies, Ian, there's a ton of digital effects in this movie. Do you know what I mean? There's a ton of special effects in this movie. It doesn't feel like it, and that's what's so incredible about it. Except for the way the light comes through and the kind of sheen of the image. Maybe that's sort of a digital artifact. But just comparing the way this movie feels to a Marvel kind of green screen movie, it's just night and day. But I think it is amazing that Netflix has allowed people the Coen brothers, Alfonso Cuaron, Martin Scorsese, to kind of do these kind of dream projects, and they come out amazing. They come out incredibly. I don't know if that business model is working for Netflix anymore. I don't know if we're going to see a lot of this stuff in the future, but it does feel like we're in a really unique moment where the last masters, right, of film are getting to do these projects that are just you've both said, I think, thank God this movie exists, and I guess thank Netflix for that.
We can say the same thing about. No, totally. I was going to say we can say the same thing about Jane Campion's most recent movie too, right? Power of the Dog. I think was also a Netflix film.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's right. Oh, bizarre. I haven't seen that one, so I don't know how it compares. But I mean, definitely with The Irishman, you feel this is this super long, kind of lumpy, strange thing that could only exist in the streaming era, where they're just go nuts. You know what I mean? People are gonna watch it over a couple days or whatever. Don't even worry about it. And again, some selves are better indulged than others, and so personally, I'm so glad these kind of movies are being made right now, and it's yeah, like I said, I don't know how long it'll last, but enjoy it while it does, I guess. Yeah, Alfonso Cuaron, he's only directed 8 movies, so diverse in subject matter, themes, style, but like, and I think it is really easy for people to just say, well, he makes good movies. I don't know if that he's an auteur like someone like, like the Coen brothers are or something like that. But watching these movies kind of like, especially in like succession, seeing his style kind of evolve and especially kind of like find his, voice with Y Tu Mama Tambien and kind of like refine that over time, like these long camera takes. Like he is like a filmmaker, I think, who's really defined. He has like these incredible, powerful themes, like these motifs and stuff like that. The visuals that you see like again and again, these spaces with these giant windows, the just like detritus of real life just filling every frame, the color green just like as an accent, or just like a dye that's like infused in everything over like some of these movies. But I think you can really define him like by his actions and by just like the incredible like energy and stuff that he puts into this movie. And we've talked about how his heroes are these people that are just like trying to like survive life, like get to the next step and try to move society forward. And I think that's such an amazing. I think that's like a perfect description of him as a filmmaker. I think his really is like a heroic kind of filmmaking. Where he's like in control of everything, just brings like this incredible energy and like curiosity to filmmaking that you just like don't see anymore, and is trying to like take it that next step forward and take move the art form, like his characters are trying to like kind of move humanity just like forward. We've talked about the camera that takes in so much information in these like long choreographed shots, the mise en scène that puts the protagonist like within a fully realized world but kind of like at a distance, so that you can't do the normal kind of traditional audience identification with the protagonist. That would be like so, especially in a movie like this, would be so easy to do, right? Like, what if you were that servant? But it's like, it's not quite that at all. The movies are about individuals in the throes of history who have to battle like the death drive of society, the repressive, stagnant status quo. Like that is the enemy in these films, and it's such he really his filmmaking style and the narratives of his films are not like really traditional narratives, but they really are powerful stories, and everything is so kind of like intertwined. And I think he has a unique ability to kind of like tell a story that maybe doesn't have like a plot per se, but is so engrossing and kind of like tells you so much about like the world that you're living in. Yeah, that's basically it. I think he's like one of the best to ever do it.
Solo Contemporary aside, I feel like it is like his mission statement in The Little Princess, of what you're talking about. And then like his conclusion in Roma in a weird way. I mean, I'm sure he'll keep going on and telling the story in different ways, but it is that thing of just like you said, the sort of detritus of society, like bearing upon the characters.
Yes.
And like how they fucking can will themselves to succeed throughout it, like, or
right.
in spite of it, I think that's really
absolutely,
that's a really powerful statement.
And I think that's what makes him relatable too, to the point you brought up again, Travis, and I've said it before, how a lot of his films, if we look at them, are actually absent a central antagonist. It's more about the series of obstacles that the main character encounters, and that's often just regular day-to-day stuff, or just stuff that would happen anyway. Even in Gravity, it's like, obstacle after obstacle, especially when we look at, of course, obviously Roma, one of the most personal and clearly relatable ones too. I mean, many people have lost a child or struggled financially or, been caught up in a series of circumstances or a war that they never intended to find themselves in. So I think that's largely what helps bring his films grounding kind of quality to him. We can relate to him in so many ways without the like mustache twirling, evil supervillain or something at the end. They have to be. It's life that we move through, and there's always that sort of glimmer of hope at the end that things can get better.
Yeah. Can I say, speaking of that, I mean, I'm just sort of mentally trying to clock where he has a villain in any of these movies, and I was going through them in my head, And fucking Voldemort's not even in that Harry Potter. Like, that's the only Harry Potter movie without Voldemort. Like,
Right.
you really,
Great point.
you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, is there a movie that has, like, a Voldemort in it?
Miss Minchin is the closest. Miss Minchin
But that's
is
the closest one. But then, yeah, I mean, I guess that is the closest.
Yeah, and I think
even in that one, it feels like
she's just doing the bidding
out of her control.
Yeah, she's just doing the bidding of like society in that one. But I think that one is. I do think of her as a villain, and I do think, and she gets her comeuppance. Like, the Dementors are like kind of the villains of the Harry Potter movie, and that's more like, you know, again, just like the police. You know,
exactly right.
It's a totally different
structural.
Yeah, that's a structural villain too.
Yeah.
Faceless.
Should we rate these movies?
Literally faceless. Yeah, that's a good point.
That's a really good
let's
call.
rate them.
Okay,
I'll go first. Oh, you go first.
Travis, you go first.
Okay. Number one is still, like, it's just so personal to me, and I really feel like it stands outside of his filmography. Like I said, I really feel like he finds his voice in Y Tu Mama Tambien, but you can already tell he is like a master filmmaker with A Little Princess, and I just think it's his most, like, beautiful movie. It's like kind of his most fantastical movie. It's the most it's the one movie like with a happy ending, and like everything kind of works out, and it's I think it's just totally circumstantial that he ended up making that film, and I'm like so grateful that it exists. Like of all of these, one of my favorite movies of all time, and still my number one Alfonso Cuaron movie. Number two, I'm gonna do a tie. My newly christened history trilogy. It's the whole thing, like Y Tu Mama Tambien, Roma, and Children of Men, just like completely masterful, really unique, and I think they kind of exemplify Alfonso Cuaron's style and like thematic concerns like perfectly. Number three, I guess, is Gravity. I still think the movie rules, but right there with it, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, and I'll probably go back to that one more, and maybe on a different day if I was more in the mood when I watched it. Harry Potter could be above Gravity, but I don't know. Gravity was just so good to me when I watched it recently. And then way below those, Solo con tu pareja, just like a fun, interesting romp, and not for me, whatever. Number 6, Great Expectations. That's all. That's it.
All right.
Nice. Yeah, I'm pretty much on there too. The only exception being my number one is Roma. I mean, this one actually said,
yes.
No
yeah,
surprise.
and it's actually not even particularly close. And again, this isn't to disparage any of his other amazing movies, but for me, this just occupies this entire separate echelon that's like the pinnacle of filmmaking to me. It's amazing. I'm so glad we got to end on this note because it's the best. It's excellent. Yes. And then, of course, Y Tu Mama Tambien right behind that, for many of the similar reasons, but you can really see him gaining his voice. I'm really glad he got to sort of flex his individuality and his muscles as a filmmaker with this one, especially following up the other two before it. Number 3, Children of Men. Number 4, Little Princess. Still love Little Princess. Right in the middle is kind of Gravity. It moves up and down. Depends on how I'm feeling that day. I still think about it a lot. Harry Potter 3, just below Gravity. Solo con tu pareja. And then the last would be Great Expectations, the one he probably never should have made. And I think he would say he never should have made that movie.
Yeah, I think he has many times.
But it's like interesting. I wonder if he would have found his voice as quickly with Y Tu Mama Tambien is such like a huge
like
step
such a
up.
reaction.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
For me, so these top 4 movies I think that we all have are just so diverse enough that they're all 10s to me. So like,
yes, exactly.
So what's the point? You know what I mean? But from my personal experience, like the fact that number 4 is number 4 is unfair to number 4.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Right.
So just from my own personal experience as this watch through, because a lot of these were the second time I'd seen them, and they hit me in such an intense way.
Yeah.
Y Tu Mama Tambien being the prime example of that. It's bordering my top 10 movies of all time. Yes. Like we had, it's really fucking moved up in my fucking love of movies. Like it's right there with some of my favorite movies of all time.
Nice.
Children of Men right underneath that, or these are all parallel. Children of Men right there, just fucking bringing it, like filmmaking power. Then I've got at number 3, A Little Princess, because with this watch, I was trying to make my list last night, and I was thinking to myself, like, you know, it's just such a fucking good. It is such a singular movie. Like, it deserves to be high on this list. Like, it's so good as a kid's movie, but also just as a movie. Then Roma, but like I said, all 4 of those fucking masterpieces in a weird way. Sorry, Chris, to use that word. Then comes Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. A lot of fun. I love those movies, or at least that one. Gravity, Solico Tupreja. Lowered expectations.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad. I feel like both you guys took away at least like a movie in this where you like had to, that it touched you deeply, and like I'm so glad, because I feel like even though we don't have the same favorites, any of us, which is I think is really cool, we all kind of recognize like that these movies like are so incredible, and they've given us like so much to think about, and they've given us these incredible like aesthetic experiences, and I loved watching these. I'm so glad you guys enjoyed them, and this is a really fun little series.
And I hope
so.
People
let's call it a day.
Good job.
Yeah. Oh, they will. They will. Yeah. I hope we can I hope we at least inspire our friends who maybe listen to this to like rewatch some of these films, or if they haven't seen them, just to watch them for the first time, because. I don't think he gets enough credit, and I hope we've done him justice.
Inspiring me to spread the gospel of Cuarón too. Like that's a special thing. As much as like the Coen brothers were my pick, and I love them deeply. Like there's been every movie that I watched this. Like I also texted another one of my friends to be like, "Have you seen this movie?" You know what I mean? Like you guys have to see this. Like so. Anyway, good talk, guys.
Let's call it a day, and I'm really excited to reconvene in 2023 for our next series. Chris, you get to choose the director. Looking forward to it.
We'll keep you all posted. Right on, guys. Right. Well, thank you for listening, guys. So much fun. Love you guys. Let's do it again soon.
Good talk.
Thanks, film friends. See ya.
Thank you for listening to Auteur Detour. We'll see you again